Oh man, I've been farming mana pearls all day. The Eternal Palace is definitely coming out soon, Dratnos. Are you pumped?
So excited for for the Eternal Palace, which is about the raid that we would be fighting in like what 2 weeks time if this was BFA.
Yeah, something like that. So we are going to compare content cycles across Legion, BFA, and Shadowlands, and thus we have made a handy dandy timeline. Uh, it is not. I guess it's not 100% to scale, but it's about as to scale as
We
I could make
tried
it.
we tried quite hard to bring this to scale as close as we can. So you can see the green events being the Legion expansion stuff. The red stuff is from BFA, and then of course Shadowlands in the white. And you can see where we are. We're 10 and a half months now into the expansion, getting close to that 1 year marker. And we've had 9.0.5 and 9.1, which came with that major raid. Whereas the contrast to Legion and BFA is actually quite stark, especially when you think about that it's unclear exactly when 9.15 will be coming out, and it's even unclearer when 9.2 will be coming out and even what's in that.
Yeah. So let's take a look at this first entry that we even have on here. That 7.1 release. This is way back in the day. This is the Return to Karazhan patch. And so with the 7.1, the Return to Karazhan patch, you ended up getting a lot of different things. You got this new mega dungeon. So we got upper and lower Karazhan, but they were only available on Mythic difficulty. They weren't added for Mythic Plus until later on. But this was actually really fast paced. And notably, they also have the Trial of Valor opening on November 8th, where this is coming out for like the week of October 25th. So they had a mini raid, which had 3 bosses in it, coming out very quickly after Emerald Nightmare. And so I think that this is actually came out very fast because of how kind of poorly tuned EN was on Mythic. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's some speculation that because EN was cleared very quickly by maybe 3 times as many guilds as I think they were expecting. Were able to just get that raid down very quickly because it was. I think they just weren't expecting us to have as good gear as we did from Mythic Plus on the first week, and then they also just kind of missed the. It was kind of like even a Kel'Thuzad style miss on just how easy Xavius ended up being.
Yeah, obviously a bunch of different, like, very specific Legion changes, legendary tuning. There's a bunch of different stuff that happened at this point. They notably there was still a cap on the legendaries that you could get, but
right.
that was broken with the 7.1 patch. It allowed you to start getting more legendaries whenever that did happen. I think that was something that was fairly undocumented.
Yeah, I think people forget just how rough the legendary and artifact power systems were really for the first. I would say it was up until if you look, 7.2 release was actually so quick, right, into this expansion, right? It was like 7-8 months into the expansion. They were already in.
Yes, like right at the 7-month mark.
Right, in patch 7.2, which largely addressed some of those major concerns, right? Whereas by contrast, the Shadowlands patch that's addressing those major concerns is going to be coming out around that 1 year mark, we assume, right? The 9.1.5 thing. But originally, you had the artifact knowledge that you had to manually set yourself to research, which if you leveled up like a week late, you were just a week behind on your artifact knowledge for ages. And the legendary items, they had like a pretty harsh soft cap where once you got your first like 2, it was really hard to get your 3rd, it was really hard to get your 4th, and you were basically never getting a 5th legendary until the new patch came out.
Yeah, they also made legendary battle protection be spec based. So like they removed the 4 cap, but it was still spec. It was still class locked.
Which that had some big problems as well, because if you got like a spec agnostic legendary like Pride has, that counted for all your specs, but you could. If you got like a spec specific one, you could get way more legendaries because you'd be able to swap your specs around and still get those first and second legendaries that were kind of handed out more freely. Yeah, it was not a system without its flaws, but it definitely was quickly iterated upon back in Legion. Also, I mean, if you just think about the number of raids, right? We were right where we are. We'd done Emerald Nightmare, we'd done Nighthold, we'd done Trial of Valor. Obviously, that was before Nighthold. We'd done Gul'dan, right? So yeah, that was Nighthold.
Gul'dan was Nighthold. And then we did.
And then we were about to get to Tomb of Sargeras, right?
Tomb of Sargeras had already been released.
Okay, so we're just starting in Tomb of Sargeras. So
Here's
that's
Tomb.
3 raids and a mini raid.
Yeah, so
Right?
Tomb went live on June 13th, and the raid came out like June 20th. And this patch right here, it's 7.2 and 7.2.5 were actually some of the most insane stuff. Plus, we also had both Upper and Lower Karazhan were now Mythic Plus dungeons, and Cathedral of Eternal Night got released as a Mythic Plus dungeon on release. So there were a lot of different things that you could do.
Yeah, and that was the Mage Tower patch as well, right? We got hit with Mage Tower, not to mention the Broken Shore, the class mounts. A lot of people remember those very fondly, right? Getting your class mount, getting a little disc to fly around on if you're a mage. So it's not like the Legion Pathfinder as well, being able to fly in the Broken Isles. That was something.
And that was 7.2. All of this was 7.2 that you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, the compass is 7.2.5 as well.
Yeah, it was their naming convention was a little bit weird back then. They desynced the patch releases from the raid releases on a lot of these, which was a little weird. But yeah,
also new legendaries came out with 7.2.5. So you had all of the legendaries that you were able to get on launch. They were fixing the bad luck protection system on it multiple times. They gave you craftable legendaries in 7.2. 7.25 rolls around, and then every spec gets 2 new legendaries. So they got the Soul of the class.
Yeah, Soul of the Druid or whatever.
Yeah. Soul of the Archdruid or whatever. Soul of the class. Talent ring. So you would get like a specific talent. And it was a fairly cool legendary. And on top of that, then there was one very specific one that it really just kind of varied. It just really varied in terms of like how good it was and usability, then that kind of thing. So
yeah,
that was definitely
I think that
something.
Compares reasonably well to like the Covenant legendaries that we got added in 9.1. Pretty close in terms of like amount of stuff, right? The Covenant legendaries is what, 48 new Legos, something like that.
True.
12 times 4, it's quite a lot. But of course, some combos don't really see any play. But they did a lot of work as well with 9.1 to rebalance them as well. Like they buffed a lot last minute to try and make them more appealing, and they succeeded in making a lot of them pretty appealing.
So BFA. All right. So we talked about
Let's
Legion.
talk about BFA.
Legion,
yeah,
I would say that the major takeaways with Legion, very fast paced on every single thing. You were getting content all of the time to a point where I remember it being very fast anecdotally. Like I do remember it being just a lot and overwhelming how much you needed to play. But at the same time, there was always something to do. And that was also a very good part of the whole entire situation.
Right. The comparison of 3 raids and a mini raid to where we're at now with 2 raids and no third really on site, like in sight for when exactly it might be. Could be several months from now.
That I think is the biggest takeaway that we're going to talk about in a second. All right, so let's go and talk about BFA. So BFA launched. BFA launched, and then there was no 8.0.5 patch. It just went straight into 8.1. And then there was like a Tides of Vengeance content release calendar that came out, right?
And so I think people forget as well, but 8.0 was one of the most barren patches they've had in terms of like how much stuff there was, right? There were the BFA dungeons, which there were at least like 10 of those instead of the 8 that we have in Shadowlands. But, beyond that, it was 1 ring Azurite, and that was it. That was the expansion feature. That was all you had for your class going on there.
Yeah, so 8.1, you got 2 ring Azurite, by the way.
That was, at least added some stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of different things that it did end up adding. Look at this extensive list. This is so much stuff that they added in 8.1, and this happened in like right at the beginning of December, from what date that I have it written down as. December 11th is when this came out, and then BOD came out on January 22nd. So those are 2 separate entries onto this because of how far apart they were. And we ended up making 2 separate entries. But this is a lot of stuff that they had to retrofit to make sure that it all worked.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those are pretty minor bullet points, right? They're like little cosmetic things, stuff like that. But some of it's definitely big. And I don't know. I mean, the expansion still felt pretty empty in 8.1 for me in BFA.
I would agree.
Because you still basically were just playing with your 1 outer ring, or your 2 outer ring now, Azurite, once you started clearing BOD. Other than that, the classes were all pretty much the same.
Yeah, then we had BOD release on January 22nd. I would say that this was I think that this raid gets a lot more acclaim than it personally deserves. That's maybe a hot take, but I felt like Stormwall Blockade was a Stowe Legion General's boss on a boat, but
it wasn't great, yeah.
Jada Proudmoore was a good boss. Like, all things considered, Chain of Proudmoore is a good boss. I think that this dungeon, this raid is remembered fondly, but I fully know why.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of cool fights in there, but it was sort of reminiscent actually of the current tier in that just like most of the fights really fell over pretty fast. Except this tier had like Painsmith that was hard, whereas Bod really didn't have anything. Like if your guild could get past Opulence, guild could get past Grong, you were kind of cruising. I guess Mechatork was tough for some types of guilds, yeah.
All right. So this is something that we have not yet seen for Shadowlands. It's like an 8.1.5, right? This was
right, a mini raid, right? Because both both Legion and BFA came with a mini raid pretty early on into them, right? Like we had Crucible and Trial of Valor in both of those.
Yeah, so 8.1.5 notably released at the exact same time that 7.2 did, which was not the patch that came with Tomb of Sargeras. That came a lot later.
Confusingly, yeah.
So 7.2 came with a lot of like system changes and a lot of different things, but at the same time, it came with like a new dungeon. Whereas at this point, we get 8.1.5, so we get a new mega dungeon with the Mechagons. We get the new zones, and then we get Crucible of Storm at some point soon. So those are.
Wait, we got Najatar and Mechagon before Crucible?
Oh wait,
no shot.
Fake. You're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
You're gaslighting me for sure.
Yeah. You're right. So 8.15 was just Crucible. Brawlers Guild also came back. You're right.
Yeah. 8.2 was when we got Najatar Mechagon.
I was definitely gaslighting you. My bad.
That's okay. I'm sure it's hard to keep all these numbers and patches straight.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that we're missing is like this mini raid. I think that if we had a mini raid for this expansion, I feel like it would kind of. I
don't know. I'm going to disagree. I think mini raids are dumb.
Really, you think mini raids are dumb? I think it would. I think it would stem a lot of the complaining.
So my perspective is like the mini raids they've done have had the last like Trial of Valor and Crucible Storms were 5 of the best raid bosses they've done in recent times, but. I think that like a thing about Crucible was that there were just a bunch of people who never did that raid because it just didn't have any easy bosses in it. I think it's important for there to be easy bosses that are current content for for people to work on. Like I think it was important that there was an Opulence and a Grong in Bod, and I think they should just tack on those great bosses at the end of actual full raid tiers rather than like the thing about Crucible is just it was time they spent making a raid tier that. So many people just never really even chose to engage with. Even among top end mythic guilds, there were a lot of guilds that sat that tier out. I love the boss fights. I love the boss design. So it's tough because like I have really fond memories of both of those tiers, but I'm not sure it's the best use of their time is to make stuff like that.
So moving forward,
another tier by now would have been sweet. But obviously, I mean, one thing that we have yet to mention is that like obviously the big reason for all this is not just some sinister plot. Like the stated reason that is very believable is that COVID has thrown a huge wrench into the dev cycle and everything, which I'm very sympathetic to.
All right, so then we got 8.2, which came with a lot of things. It came with Najatar Mechagon, it came with Essences, and then Eternal Palace came out like 2 weeks after this. So this was actually a fairly large patch, and it brought a lot of different things to the game. I think, dude, those Essences on release, the benthic gear farming, the new zones. We got a new. Obviously, we hadn't really spoken about this, but we're at season 3 at this point. And we have a 3rd new seasonal affix, as opposed to only being stuck at 2, where we're currently sitting, right? And this is a little bit after where we currently stand. This is around 1 month away of where we're currently sitting, but at the same time, this was a lot of stuff that we have missed out on, just relative to the Shadowlands cycle compared to where we were in BFA.
Yeah, benthic gear. I think like if we're going to do some complaining about Shards of Domination in here, which I'm not sure if we will in this video, but we've certainly done our fair share in other videos. I think benthic gear was probably a worse sin. Like that funneling your main with the mana pearls you were farming on your alts to get those benthic items was. That was real bad.
That was doomed. I think Essences on launch were also like...
I think they were fine on launch, actually. Like, okay, so the thing about Essences was there were some like Blood of the Enemy that were really valuable week 1 if you could get them to rank 3, because like some of the others you couldn't get to rank 3 quickly, but Blood of the Enemy you could if you just grinded for 40 hours in the first week or some absurd number like that, right?
Well, they also ended up. I don't want to say soft forcing people, but the people spent a lot of time in islands trying to grind up their.
Yeah, to get enough neck level for like Crucible Flame 3.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
I was like, what is the name of that thing?
So that part wasn't great, but I don't know. I mean, I don't mind doing a grind on on my main character on week 1 of a new patch. Like I don't mind that as much as I think essences were the biggest sin they committed for me was like what 4 months later my alts were like when I was looking at starting to play an alt.
That's fair.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't all sunshine and roses on first week either. But it was kind of fun to be like going out and unlocking all these essences for the first time on for all these different things.
It really could have been worse, I think.
It depends on who you were as well. Yeah, it just depends on how much you hated that.
So just in retro, like just looking at this graph, the start of BFA was kind of slow, but they really picked up the pacing like towards the middle of BFA. You got a lot of different things that you could do, and we entered multiple seasons really quickly because the seasons were a lot more important in BFA than they were in Legion, because in Legion, like all of these patches were major milestones, but for BFA, you did have the seasonal affixes. You had they started running the seasonal structure where like that 8.1 is like a fairly big change. The 8.2 is also a fairly big change, all things considered, because they started adding like there were a lot of systems on top of systems that were also included in BFA.
I mean, if you think about these 3 expansions, they all kind of have this theme of launching with like an Achilles heel. And I think Legion, a huge point of credit for Legion is that was addressed really quickly. Like they tried multiple different things with legendaries in all of those first like 3 patches to make them less of a pain to acquire, and like multiple little tweaks to artifact power to make it a little bit less bad. Some people hated artifact power all the way through, but I think we can all agree it was better by the end of Legion than it was the start, right?
I would agree.
And, so I think Legion, like if you look at where they fixed legendaries, where they fixed artifact power, and how quickly they were trying to do that, like it's in those first 4 to 6 months of the expansion. And a huge amount of credit is owed there.
I would say that they were more broken than anything that we've seen since, though.
Yeah, legendaries were definitely a big time.
Artifact knowledge being you were permanently behind for 4 months was also really
that was that was not great.
That was really dumb.
In BFA, I think there was the main problem I would identify with that expansion was just that it was so empty of stuff. And there was really kind of not fixed until essences and kind of corruption were added, which was corruption is well in the future here. Yeah. But essences did start to add some nice depth to the characters again. But if you look at Shadowlands, we still have yet to get to that patch that addresses the day 0 complaints that people had with 9.0, or really the early beta complaints that people had with the system. And I think to 9.1.5's credit, most of those are getting hit at that point. But I mean, it's going to be a full year in, which the average expansion is 2 years. I think there's a good case to be made that this one's going to be a longer expansion, just because that unless they decide to like do a WAD and just get us out of here on 9.2, which has been speculated about. There's been some speculation in some quarters whether that's a possibility. Unless they decide to do that, like that we're going to still have spent like half this expansion, right, with the systems in their initial state, which I think is a big contributor to like
yeah.
When you look back at Legion, is like it's not that it launched perfect, but it was iterated on rapidly.
Yeah, 905. I mean, there wasn't really anything in 905 aside from
905
Valor got added.
That was sweet.
Valor got added. The Maw got changed a little bit, and then and then Torghast got changed a little bit. Yeah,
the 9.0.5 changes to Torghast were largely overwritten by the 9.1 changes to Torghast, which have been good changes to Torghast. I feel like Torghast is maybe in a better place than it used to be. Although, I don't know, man. It still feels like when I zone into Torghast, mobs are auto-attacking me for like 40,000 damage. And I don't know why they do that. But I mean, you can fix it. It's just like, I don't know. It feels like that system has still really missed the mark for me, at least. Like I would enjoy a Mage Tower style challenge, but auto attacks ain't it for me.
9.1 really was not that bad.
Yeah.
It's I think that like all things considered, you can't say that 9.1 is like realistically a bad um like patch. I mean, I think the issue is just ultimately just how much supplemental content we've gotten for the game, like and with like when 9.1 was released. Like look
Yeah,
at
so we got
where it is.
Tazavesh, right?
Yeah. So look at where 9.1 is in this timeline, and we're getting like a 9.1's worth of content. It is a fair amount of content, but with where it is on the timeline, it just feels so bad because at this point you've already had like a lot of different things released. You've had multiple raid tiers from like almost a second raid tier from Legion with a mini raid there slapped in where you haven't had anything even close in Shadowlands yet.
Yeah, it's tough because like on the one hand, it's a thing to complain about, right? It's like, oh, we're not getting content. On the other hand, is maybe a way of saying like, hey, these problems you have with the game, right? These problems that people are identifying with the game, like some large fraction of that, I think, is just that there hasn't been new content, right?
Yeah,
Like I think
I
that
mean,
people like, the patch overstays its welcome after like 6 months of no new content, and something that Legion did a really good job of was never letting us get to that point. And so maybe that's something to make you feel better about the rest of the stuff around the game right now.
yeah. So
Not the like, yeah,
I think that my general thoughts on it are WoW has turned a lot more into a seasonal game than it has been, at least in the past. In Legion, you got like slammed with content. In BFA, it felt like kind of more the same, but it was at least a little bit slower. And then now Shadowlands, I think that content. I don't want to say I prefer this content pacing because this is a little bit slow for my taste, but I do prefer it being a little bit slower than where it was in Legion, where it was like, oh my god, I have to dedicate my whole life to this game.
yeah. Well, so I think what you're identifying as well, it's partially also from just like as you get more like serious with the game, right? As you start being in like a better guild or whatever, you start clearing the content faster, and so it's like the ratio of the time that you're on progression to the time on farm moves in a certain direction. And then when the game is also, having more space between its release cycles and having like, say, relatively easy raids like Sanctum of Domination that gets cleared relatively quickly compared to a lot of the other raids, like that sort of compounds with that, right? Those effects are moving in the same direction.
Yeah, it would have been okay. I think that they probably should have just slammed Tazavesh Mythic Plus with the release of Tazavesh.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because we talked about Cathedral, which came out with Mythic Plus. Seed of the Triumvirate came out later in Legion with Mythic Plus as well. But the Mega Dungeons, which at this point in all three expansions, we had our Mega Dungeon, right? But we didn't have Mythic Plus for our Mega Dungeons yet at this point in any of the expansions either. And it's definitely an interesting
Wait, yes, we did.
discussion. Oh, did
So
we?
Karazhan came out. Karazhan came out in 7.1.
Oh, and then we
Karazhan Mythic,
just got an M Plus in 2.5 or something, or in 2?
Karazhan Mythic Plus came out in like 7.2. Yeah.
Okay. So we'd just gotten M Plus for Karazhan, but we were still obviously we'd just gotten
So
Mechagon, and we're still waiting on Tazavesh M Plus.
yeah, so Karazhan Mythic Plus came out the same time Cathedral of Eternal Night got released, also as a Mythic Plus dungeon. So they got like you got a lot of dungeon.
There were also
all.
just more dungeons to start with that expansion too, right? Than Shadowlands, like
10.
Yeah, 10 baseline and 10 baseline in BFA as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Whereas in Shadowlands, obviously we have the 8 baseline, and we're still at 8, and we will still be at 8 until 9.2, presumably.
It's a very unfortunate situation.
I definitely agree that that's a contributing factor for like people who do Mythic Plus. Like 8 is a lot less than 10 or 12 in terms of just longevity.
Yeah. Oh well, I think all things considered, I've gone through this. I feel like I've determined that the reason that I have been frustrated with like the content cycles is just like how slow they end up in. I think that's like the amount of content that we're getting is like a fair amount, like especially for like the 9.1 patch. I mean, that is a fair amount of content. It's just, am I okay with it being in the 7th month? No, I'm not okay with it being in the 7th month of the expansion's worth of content.
Right. And like, I mean, obviously, like, COVID throwing stuff a loop, but also, the expansion was delayed also, right? So yeah. It's how many of the patches can we credit the same, several months to, or should it just all be assessed at once? I don't know. It's
rumor mill has it that like potentially 9.2 is coming out like February, right? Like that. I mean, that's what I've been reading on Twitter, is just like February speculation. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, I
so
don't put too much
long.
stock into those things, but I definitely, I mean, if you think about it, right, like when would they release 9.2, like a month after 9.1.5? Probably not, right? Probably
So
give it a couple
9.15
months.
would have to come out like today for them to be
Yeah,
able to release 9.2 before like
which
because
what?
because 9.2 would have to come out like mid-November, something like that. Like maybe
No
it
shot.
could.
Yeah, there's no shot.
Yeah, so it has to come out after the beginning of the year, which is like, oh man, it's gonna be so long. Oh, pain.
Yeah, and it's like 9.1.5 is going to come out, and I'm excited about all the features, like being able to swap covenants and stuff. But I'm excited to play these new covenant combos for things and experience the new freedom in the game. But it's kind of tough to be excited about it when there's also not new content to do it with, right?
I need Tazavesh Mythic Plus. I need a new raid. I need to like
Need it so bad.
Yeah, I need that new content to be able to like really utilize all of these changes in 9.1.5 because like, oh yeah, dude, I'm gonna do Sanctum of Domination farm for the 10th week.
Yeah, well, I will be doing it as a different covenant as soon as 9.1.5 comes out. You can bet all you got on that.
I what do you want to ask the comment section today, Dratnos? Is there any questions?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting philosophy. Like, do you guys prefer a fast content cycle? I know that there was some pushback against it. Like Ian, after WoD was talking about like quantity is quality. And I think this really does illustrate how true that is. But I don't know if you guys agree with that. Sometimes things get accused of being rushed depending on how they come out. And yeah, it's a tough trade-off. I don't know. I'm stumped.
I'm looking forward to 9.1.5. Hope 9.2 is soon.
Yeah,
I think
please.
that the
Needs
Legion
so bad.
I think the Legion Mythic Plus time walking stuff will actually be kind of cool, but at the same time,
It's
not
only
going
for
to
2
satiate.
weeks.
It's not going to satiate my hunger for new content, right?
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, like, comment, subscribe. We really need this so bad. Please.
Please. We don't have 9.2 or 9.1.5. All we live on is comments.
All right. I also spent entirely too long making this graphic, so please like this video. All right, goodbye.
Yeah, however long you think it might have been, it was twice as long.
Goodbye.